Okay, so have you ever wondered how living with someone, like really sharing a space, impacts how you grow as a person?
Hmm. Yeah, it's one of the things you don't think about much until
Until you're actually doing it, right?
exactly. Like, does having someone around 24/7 help you become more you, or does it kind of, I don't know, blend you together?
That's exactly what we're diving into today, pulling from these excerpts from a proposed podcast. They're calling it Modern Love, and it seems like they're going pretty deep with this, like interviewing all sorts of experts and couples.
Oh, wow. So, like, getting different perspectives on this whole living together thing.
Yeah, their main question is, does sharing a living space help or actually hinder individual development? Which is a big one, right?
Huge. Because we all want to grow, become the best versions of ourselves. But
And then there's this whole other side of wanting closeness, partnership, all that.
exactly. So, before we go any further, maybe we should define what we even mean by independence and personal growth. Because those can mean different things to different people.
Good point. Like, I'm picturing someone living off the grid, totally solo, when I hear independence, which isn't really what we're talking about here.
Right, it's more nuanced than that. The way they define independence in this proposed podcast is less about being alone and more about, like, your ability to make your own decisions.
Even when you're in a relationship.
Exactly. It's about pursuing your own interests, keeping your own identity, even when you're super close to someone.
So, not being a lone wolf, but being yourself, even while being part of a couple.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's personal growth. The source defines that as, well, it's like evolving in a way that feels really true to you. So emotionally, intellectually, maybe trying new things. But the key is it's all about becoming more you.
Okay, so let me throw out a scenario. Let's say I take up pottery because my partner is obsessed with it. Is that me growing or just me being, like, influenced by them?
Ooh, good question. It really highlights the nuance of personal growth within a relationship.
Right. Like, where's the line?
It seems like the experts in this podcast agree that real personal growth comes from expanding who you are in a way that feels genuine to you, not just doing things because your partner likes them.
Makes sense. So, this podcast presents two sides of the coin, how living together can actually boost personal growth, but also how it might hold you back.
Two sides to every story.
Exactly. So, let's start with the positive. Why might living together actually be a catalyst for growth?
Well, one of the big arguments they make is that it forces you to share responsibility. Think about it. When you're living together, you're constantly navigating daily life together. Chores, bills, decisions, stuff you might not have to deal with as much when you're on your own.
It's like adulting, but on steroids, because now there's another person involved.
Yeah, and that shared responsibility can push you to get better at all these essential relationship skills, like communicating, compromising, problem solving.
So, it's not just about, like, splitting the dishes, it's about learning to work as a team.
Totally. And the podcast even mentions a study that found couples who handle those shared responsibilities well tend to be more satisfied in their relationship.
Oh, interesting. So, there's actual research to back this up.
Yeah. Beyond that, cohabitating also opens you up to trying new things together.
Yeah.
You're exposed to your partner's hobbies, their interests, things you might never have even considered on your own.
I can totally see that. Like, my partner got me into rock climbing, something I never would have thought of doing before. But now we both love it.
Perfect example. Shared experiences can definitely help you both grow.
Okay, so we've got shared responsibility, trying new things. What other goodies does the podcast highlight?
They talk about how living together creates this intense level of vulnerability. You're seeing each other's everything, the good, the bad, the just plain messy. That kind of intimacy, while it can be tough sometimes, can be really transformative.
Yeah, it's definitely taking things to a whole other level.
Right. But I can see how facing all that could force you to confront your own, flaws and stuff, which ultimately leads to growth.
Makes sense. So you've got this built-in support system, someone who's got your back, which can also make you more confident to, like, take risks and go after your own goals.
Oh, totally. It's like having your own personal cheerleader, but one who also lives with you.
Which could be amazing, but also maybe a little much sometimes.
For sure. And that's where you get to the flip side of this coin.
hmm
It can't all be sunshine and roses, right? This podcast doesn't shy away from the potential downsides either.
Oh, good. Because I was going to say, it can't all be good.
Yeah.
So what are some of the challenges or potential pitfalls they bring up?
Well, one of the big ones is this idea of enmeshment.
Enmeshment, huh? That sounds a little ominous.
It can be. It's like when the boundaries between partners get so blurred, it's hard to even tell where one person ends and the other begins.
So instead of becoming more you, you kind of disappear into the relationship.
Yeah, kinda. It's like losing your own compass, always deferring to your partner, even when it goes against what you want.
Yikes. So in real life, what does that look like? What are some signs of enmeshment?
Imagine always agreeing to watch your partner's favorite show, even though you hate it, or
Mhm.
always giving up your free time to fit their schedule, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Over time, all those little things can eat away at your sense of self.
Yeah, I can see how that could build resentment, feeling like you're losing yourself. So we've got these potential benefits, better communication, new experiences, but then this looming risk of enmeshment. Is there even a way to strike a balance? Can you really live together and stay true to yourself?
That's the million-dollar question.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily, they tackle that head on in the Modern Love podcast.
Okay, good, because I was getting a little worried there.
They seem to believe it is possible, but it takes conscious effort, a real shift in how you think about things.
So how do we find that sweet spot? What are some of their strategies?
Well, one big takeaway is that having a strong sense of self before moving in together can make a huge difference. Knowing your values, what you like to do, what you want in life, makes it easier to hold on to those things, even when you're sharing a space with someone.
Okay, that makes sense. If you're already solid in who you are, you're less likely to, get swept away by the relationship.
Exactly. And then, of course, communication is key. But it's not just talking at each other. It's about really listening, trying to understand your partner's point of view, and being willing to find compromises that actually work for both of you.
It's like communication is the magic ingredient in, every successful relationship, right?
It really is. And in this case, it has to be even more intentional, more ongoing.
So having that strong sense of self and being great communicators, those are the basics. What else can couples do to avoid that whole enmeshment thing and make sure they're both growing as individuals, even while living together?
Well, they talk about a few really interesting strategies in the podcast, and one that caught my attention is this idea of creating separate spaces within the shared environment.
Like physically separate.
Exactly. They call them autonomy zones, places in the home where each person can go to be alone, do their own thing.
So, my crap corner would be off limits.
Yeah. Like that. They decorate it however they want, and it's their space to recharge, pursue their hobbies, whatever.
Hmm.
And the other partner's not allowed in unless it's an emergency.
Oh, wow. It's like having your own mini retreat, but within your shared home. I like that idea. But wouldn't that create, distance between you?
That's what you'd think, right?
Uh,
But they actually interviewed several couples who do this, and most said that it actually made them closer.
Really? How so?
It seems like having that dedicated space to be themselves made them feel more refreshed, more energized, and they actually appreciated their time together more.
Interesting. It's like sometimes you need that little bit of separation to really appreciate what you have.
Totally. And the podcast also talks about this other cool thing couples are doing, date night swaps.
Date night swaps. Okay, I'm all ears.
Instead of the typical dinner and a movie date night, they each plan an activity the other person has to do.
So, I could get dragged to a salsa class one week, and then the next week.
You're learning to brew kombucha. Exactly. And the couples they interviewed said it was amazing for pushing them outside their comfort zones, trying new things, and keeping things exciting.
I love that. It's like a built-in way to keep learning and growing as a couple, even if you've been together for years.
Exactly. It keeps things fresh.
Hmm.
But, all this talk about autonomy zones and special date nights might make single people listening think, whoa, living together sounds like a lot of work.
It does sound kind of complicated.
Right. And to be fair, the podcast does say that there's nothing wrong with choosing to live alone, whether it's for a while or even, forever. It can be a fantastic opportunity to really figure yourself out.
For sure. You create your own space, your own rules, really get to know yourself without having to think about anyone else's preferences.
Exactly. But what I think is really key here is that whether you're single, dating, living together, whatever, having a strong sense of self is crucial for any relationship.
Like knowing who you are, what you value, that sets you up for success no matter what, right?
Right. So for anyone out there thinking about taking the plunge and moving in with their partner, the advice seems to be go in with realistic expectations, communicate honestly, and be prepared to adapt.
And maybe have a good sense of humor, too, because it sounds like there'll be some bumps along the way.
Oh, definitely. Because as we've learned from this dive so far, living together isn't a guarantee of personal growth, but it's not a recipe for disaster either. It all depends on how you approach it as a couple.
Well said. We've already unpacked so much, and honestly, I'm feeling inspired to rethink a few things in my own relationship. But we're just getting started. There's still more to explore, more juicy insights from modern love to dive into.
So stay tuned. We'll be right back with part 2, where we'll keep uncovering how this whole cohabitation thing impacts our lives and relationships.
Hmm.
It's crazy to think how all this, living together and personal growth stuff ties into the bigger picture of what's going on in society.
Oh, totally. Like, even just the fact that cohabitation is so much more common now than it used to be. For a lot of couples, it's practically a given before marriage, right?
Right. And the Modern Love podcast actually talks about this shift, how it adds another layer of complexity to the whole conversation. Like, back in the day, moving in together was a much bigger deal.
Yeah, it was a serious step. Now it can feel more casual, like just the next logical step in a relationship.
Which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean we need to be more aware of how it affects us as individuals, no matter what we see for the future of the relationship.
Because whether you're aiming for marriage, a long-term partnership, or just enjoying the ride, living together will shape you in some way.
For sure. And speaking of those bigger societal trends, the podcast brings up something really interesting. They suggest that our culture's huge emphasis on individual achievement, like follow your dreams, be your best self, might actually clash with how we approach cohabitation.
Oh, wow, I see what you mean. It's like we're told to go after our own goals and be ambitious, but then also expected to be in these super supportive, coupled up relationships. How do those two things even work together?
Right. It's this constant back and forth between what you need and what the relationship needs.
And I bet that tension is even more intense when you're sharing the same space every single day.
Definitely.
Mm.
Suddenly, even little decisions like how to decorate or what's for dinner become these mini battles about expressing yourself versus like compromising.
Oh, tell me about it. My partner and I have very different ideas about what makes a space feel cozy. Let's just say my minimalist side doesn't always mesh with their love of, let's call it collections.
Uh-huh. I feel that. And it just shows how even the small stuff can represent this bigger struggle.
Hmm.
How do we balance being ourselves with building a life together?
So, what's the answer? How do we manage that tension between wanting to grow as individuals, but also, build a life with someone? Does the podcast offer any solutions?
Well, they don't have a magic formula,
Huh.
but they keep coming back to the importance of really honest, open communication.
There it is again. Communication, the answer to like 99% of relationship problems.
Right. But it's not just about talking. It's about how you talk. They talk a lot about active listening, putting yourself in your partner's shoes, and being willing to actually find solutions that work for both of you.
And compromise isn't always easy, is it? It can feel like you're giving up something you want to make the relationship work.
That's true. And that's why the podcast stresses knowing your non-negotiables, those things that are absolutely essential for your well-being and sense of self.
So if I know I need a dedicated workspace to be productive and not lose my mind, that's something I need to be upfront about.
Exactly. And your partner might have their own non-negotiables. Maybe it's a certain level of tidiness or time for their hobbies. The key is finding that middle ground where both people feel respected and, happy.
So compromise, but not in a way that leaves you feeling resentful or like you're losing yourself.
Exactly. And it's a constant process. What you need and what's important to you might change over time. So you have to keep checking in, being flexible, adjusting things as you go.
Wow, so it's not a one-time conversation, it's a constant dialogue. That's a lot of work. But I guess it's worth it if it means you can both thrive.
That's the goal. And even with the best communication, you're going to have disagreements. We're all different people. You're never going to find someone who's perfectly compatible with you on every single thing.
Oh, absolutely. My partner's a night owl. I'm a morning person. Let's just say we've had our fair share of sleepy arguments over the years.
I get it. And the podcast talks about how it's often those little everyday differences that can really test a relationship, especially when you're living together.
So how do you keep those small annoyances from becoming huge blowouts? What do the modern love experts suggest?
Well, one thing they recommend is remembering you're on the same team. It's not you versus your partner. It's both of you versus the problem.
That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah,
Approaching challenges as allies instead of enemies.
exactly. And it helps to focus on solutions that genuinely work for both people, not just one person getting their way all the time.
So compromise, but in a way that feels fair, not just giving in to avoid conflict.
Right. And sometimes that means being creative, like
Yeah.
having designated quiet time, noise-canceling headphones.
Or maybe agreeing that some areas of the apartment have to stay clutter-free while others can embrace a more, let's call it, eclectic style.
Yeah. It's about finding practical solutions that respect both personalities. And honestly, sometimes it's just being okay with agreeing to disagree. Not every little thing needs to be a fight.
That's so true. Sometimes it's better to let go and focus on what you love about your partner instead of getting hung up on the small stuff.
Exactly. And this is a big point they make in the podcast. Successful cohabitation isn't about achieving perfect harmony. It's about navigating those inevitable ups and downs with grace, humor, and lots of communication.
I love that. It's about embracing the messy reality and enjoying the journey even when it's tough.
You got it. And who knows, maybe those decorating disagreements or sleepy arguments will become the funny stories you tell years down the road.
It's true. It's all part of the shared history that makes your relationship unique. But we've been so focused on these big ideas, we haven't even touched on all the personal stories and expert insights from the Modern Love excerpts.
Oh, you're right. We got to keep digging.
Remember those autonomy zones we talked about? The Modern Love podcast actually gives some real-life examples of how couples make this work. There's this one story that really stuck with me about a couple who actually designed separate spaces in their apartment.
They were calling them autonomy zones too, and the podcast went into a lot of detail about how they set them up. Like each person had a room, totally their own space. They could decorate it however they wanted.
Oh, that's cool. So it was like their own space to work on projects, read, or just have some alone time, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like a little sanctuary within their shared home.
I like that. Did they talk about how it affected their relationship? Like, did it make them feel more distant?
That's the surprising part. They actually said it made their relationship stronger.
Really?
It wasn't just about being physically separate. They had this agreement, like a rule, to respect each other's boundaries. So they wouldn't interrupt each other in their autonomy zones unless it was a real emergency. And they said this actually made them feel more connected when they were together, more energized.
Huh. Maybe sometimes a little distance does make the heart grow fonder. Like, giving each other space to be individuals helps you appreciate the time you do have together even more.
Yeah, maybe. It makes you think. And it kind of relates to something that comes up a lot in psychology, that we need both connection and autonomy in relationships.
Yeah.
Too much of one or the other can throw things off balance.
It's all about finding that sweet spot, right?
Right. This Modern Love podcast is full of good stuff.
Yeah.
There's another couple they talked about who had a really interesting approach to date night.
Oh, yeah. What did they do?
Instead of the typical dinner and a movie, they would each plan an activity, something totally new, and the other person had to try it.
So, like, one week I'm getting dragged to a pottery class, and the next week...
You're at a kombucha making workshop. Something like
Oh,
that.
yeah. That actually sounds kind of fun, though.
Right. And that's what this couple loved about it. They said it was awesome for getting them out of their comfort zones, trying things they never would have considered before. It kept things interesting and helped them keep growing as a couple.
It's like a built-in way to avoid getting stuck in a rut.
Totally. But all this talk about autonomy zones and fancy date nights, I wonder if some single people listening are feeling a little intimidated about this whole cohabitation thing. Like, whoa, it sounds like a lot of work.
It does sound like there's a lot to consider, like a lot more to it than just moving in with someone you like.
Yeah, for sure. And honestly, it's not for everyone. The podcast even acknowledges that living alone can be amazing for self-discovery. Like, you get to create your own space on your own terms, set your own schedule.
And you don't have to compromise on anything. It's all you.
Exactly. But what I think is the biggest takeaway here, whether you're single, partnered, living together or not, is that having a strong sense of self is crucial for any relationship.
That's so important, like knowing who you are, what's important to you, what you want in life.
Exactly. So for anyone thinking about moving in with their partner, the advice seems to be, go in with your eyes wide open, talk honestly about everything, and be willing to adapt as you go.
And remember to keep your sense of humor.
Oh, definitely. This whole deep dive has really highlighted that living together isn't this like magic solution for personal growth, but it's not automatically a bad thing either. It really comes down to how you and your partner approach it.
Right. It's about setting boundaries, talking openly, and making an effort to take care of yourselves, both as individuals and as a couple. And I think that's a great note to wrap things up on.
Yeah, I think so too.
We've covered so much in this deep dive. I know I've got a lot to think about, and hopefully our listeners do too. Whether you're happily cohabitating, loving the single life, or somewhere in between, we hope this gave you some food for thought. Remember, the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself, so take care of that, keep growing, and as always, thanks for joining us on the deep dive.